Hey everybody, it's me, Crazyfrankie, and I'd like to welcome you to my Week 4 key game picks. Before we get into week number 4, boy oh boy was week 3 something. If you go back and think about what happened in week number 3, obviously there was a lot of things that come to mind, but obviously some things were, it's more like I can't believe this happened again. Obviously, I'm talking about the Cowboys. They got whooped again. But surprisingly, though, the Cowboys actually tried to make a comeback in the second half. But Lamar Jackson and the Ravens finally getting off the schneid. They finally get the first win of the season. Obviously, it was Lamar Jackson's best game, but it was really more Derrick Henry really sticking it to the Cowboys, because during the offseason, through some media, they were saying that Derrick Henry really wanted to be a Cowboy, but somehow that Jerry Jones didn't listen. And obviously, Jerry Jones, obviously is unfortunately getting punched in the face for that one. So, yep, the Cowboys again lose again. It wasn't as bad as the game against the Saints. And speaking about the Saints, how about the Saints being held to only 12 points, to really a season low so far this season of under 20 points. The Philadelphia Eagles really came out to play, and in a game, look, let's be real. Last week's game was really must win for Philadelphia, because no question that Nick Sirianni would be in more hot water than he already is as of now for what happened with the Falcons 2 weeks ago. But the Eagles finally getting a victory. How about the Vikings? Undefeated with Sam Darnold, and the way that team has just come together. The Vikings have been a huge surprise at 3-0. They're undefeated still, and currently in first place in that NFC North division. Obviously, a big matchup with the Packers coming up, especially wording on if Jordan Love will be playing. We don't know about that yet, but that is going to be one of the key games I will get into. And I look at other teams that went around the rest of week number 3. Obviously, the Chiefs are still 3-0. Atlanta had a bit control of that football game, but obviously penalties killed them, and the Chiefs took advantage of it. And I know there's been a lot of controversy so far these 3 weeks with the Chiefs, obviously involving referees and some bad penalties. It's really hard to say. And look, there was definitely some bad calls for the past 2 weeks that involved the Chiefs that really went in their favor. And I can understand why a lot of teams have been pissed lately, and a lot of fans have been pissed lately. It's hard. That to me, just a bit disgusting on that part. I mean, I can't explain that there's been a lot of favoritism or anything, so that matter whatever controversy there is. But yep, the defending champs are 3-0, which they could have been probably 1-2, or let alone they could have been 0-3 at this point, because those 3 games they played, they don't really look like the defending. They don't look like a contender for a Super Bowl, because they've been playing pretty sloppy lately. Travis Kelce didn't even get that many touches or catches in that game against the Falcons, so it's pretty quite surprising there. It's really hard to say when I look at some other teams right now. Obviously, the Bengals are 0-3, and pretty much their season might be over already, despite that bad defense. Washington really making a statement on their own. And how about the Buffalo Bills? Just basically destroying the Jaguars on Monday night. And that was just utter dominance by Josh Allen. This Bills team is really making a huge statement right now, even though it's early in the season and they haven't gotten to the nitty-gritty right now of their schedule. But still, the Bills are not messing around here. So this is actually another surprise too. And how about the Panthers finally getting their first win over the Raiders? That is embarrassing. If you're a Raiders fan, you gotta be pissed. How could you let Andy Dalton and that terrible Panthers team go into Vegas and then get embarrassed? That to me, and obviously Coach Antonio Pierce was irate and accusing most of his team that they quit. That to me is just astounding right now. Anyways, my friends, week 3, what happened in week number 3 obviously has its own segment, but we need to get into week number 4, so let's get that going. Alrighty, everybody, let's begin with key game number 1. It is a battle in the NFC North. The Minnesota Vikings versus the Green Bay Packers. Surprisingly, the Packers are actually favored in this game by the odds makers at -2.5. And I don't know, I really think that number could get much lower by the time it's kickoff, because I don't really have any word as of now if Jordan Love will start in this game. Because it's really tough to say if he will start, because obviously they've been playing very well despite him not playing. But when I look at the Vikings in this one here, this is going to be a real test for the Packers if Jordan Love doesn't play in this game. Sam Darnold was 17 of 28, 181 yards and 4 touchdowns. And really has turned his career around and gone into a good situation with the Vikings in the way, because the Vikings have been a huge surprise so far. And this is a team that is definitely making some noise and trying to prove a lot of doubters wrong. The Packers right now, this is kind of must win for them right now, just to pretty much keep this thing in par, the way that the NFC North Division has been very tough. It's a very, very difficult game to pick here. This is definitely 50-50 because I really think that the Vikings defense really did a fantastic job on the Texans. And I think, to me, if they can get, assuming that Jordan Love plays in this game, I really don't know as of the time of this video, or their backup was going to keep on playing. But if they bring pressure, that offensive line is going to be in for a long day against that Minnesota defense, because they did a hell of a job basically holding C.J. Stroud to really a season low in terms of yardage and pass attempts. And this is really interesting, the fact that can they do the same thing with Jordan Love, who's more mobile, and if they can stop Jacobs as well. It's a very tough pick here, but I got to make a pick here in this football game. It should be a good one between these two teams. I like the Vikings in this one. I think, to me, the Vikings defense is real. I think the Packers are going to run into a defense that's really going to put a lot of pressure either on Jordan Love or whoever, or if his backup's still going to play in this game. So it's going to be this is not a sure pick here, because these are two teams right now. Especially Minnesota. I'm not surprised. Was very surprised that they've been pretty good up until this point. I'm going to take Minnesota plus 2.5. I think they'll barely beat the Packers. This is going to be a dogfight for all throughout the football game. But I'm going to pick the Vikings here in a very close game. I think they win by a field goal in this one here. I'm going to pick the Vikings over the Packers. Key game number 2, going into the NFC South. It is the New Orleans Saints versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are a slight 1.5 point favorite. That number is definitely going to get to either 1 point or maybe you pick 'em status. Derek Carr was 14 of 25 last week, 142 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. As his counterpart Kirk Cousins in the loss against the Chiefs was 20 of 29, 230 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. This is going to be a very, very tight ball game here. The Saints have been able to run the ball effectively. Derek Carr's been able to pass pretty well, but obviously the Philadelphia made a good defensive battle between the Saints offense last week, and basically held the Saints to really didn't even get to 20 points. So there's definitely bringing a lot of questions for both these two teams going in. Obviously, the NFC South is much more competitive this year, and the Saints are making it even more competitive despite the huge surprise of the way they started out the first 2 weeks of the season prior to getting whooped against the Eagles. I think it boils down to the point is which team's defense makes the stops that is near. Because the Saints and the Falcons, in terms of the running game, the Saints do have more of the better of the running game, but in terms of the passing game, it's average for both these two teams. They're about evenly matched between Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr. So it's going to boil down to who makes the plays in this game. But to me, I'm giving a slight edge more to the Saints because their running game has been very effective, and the Falcons really did have a hard time running the ball against the Chiefs. I'm going to pick the New Orleans Saints in this game at plus 1.5. I think the Saints, despite that loss to the Eagles, I think they'll get back on track. The Falcons really have a lot of question marks there in the secondary. And obviously, Kirk Cousins, they're barely trying to figure out. They're still trying to adjust this offense here. I really think that the Saints' offense is a little bit better in this football game, but it's going to be a close game, no question, in a battle between these two rivals. I'm going to pick the Saints here at plus 1.5. I think they get the victory here. It's going to be a very tight ball game in this one here. I like the Saints to beat the Falcons. Key game number 3. It is the Seattle Seahawks versus the Detroit Lions. Now, the last 2 meetings between these two football teams, they've been pretty good games. Especially last year, they went into overtime in Detroit, and Seattle went in and beat them in overtime. Geno Smith last week against the Dolphins, it was pretty impressive here. Look at this. It was actually, I shouldn't say impressive, it was pretty decent, I should say. 26 of 34, 289, one touchdown, but he was picked off twice. I was a little bit surprised on that stat there because the Dolphins only managed 3 points, and that's all they can manage throughout the entire game. The Lions last week getting back on track was huge, but now they got big question marks here as they lose some key defensive players, and we don't know the status of Sam Laporta. He was carted off last week against the against the Cardinals, I should say. And that's an offensive weapon you cannot afford to lose. Goff was 18 of 23, 199 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he was picked off once last week. It would not surprise me if this game becomes another classic. For some reason, the Seahawks and the Lions the last few seasons have really been good football games. And there's no question you expect a shootout on Monday night. There's no question about it. But I think the Detroit Lions, will avenge the loss from last year because obviously that loss really ate at them besides the NFC Championship game with the 49ers. I think they really want to punch the Seahawks in the mouth. But obviously, defense-wise, they're in for some trouble. They're in for a little bit of trouble if Seattle gets the ball running or if Geno Smith makes some plays himself going out of the pocket. Detroit is a 3.5-point favorite, but guarantee that number is definitely going to get much lower. It could go to 2.5, maybe 2. This is going to be a very, very close game on Monday night. I think the Lions will edge. I think the Lions will get their retribution in this game. It's going to be a very tight ball game. I think to me, I'm picking the Lions here at -3.5. I think to me, if their offense can get rolling again, and obviously they're going to have to make a few adjustments now because they don't know if they're going to have Sam Laporta for this game, and it does hurt them. It does hurt them. It does hurt Goff's go-to. It hurts not having his go-to guy a lot. But I think to me, the Seahawks, the way they played, and if Geno Smith gets under pressure a lot in this game and makes mistakes, I think the Seahawks could be in for a rude awakening in this one here. I'm going to pick the Lions at -3.5. They'll beat the Seahawks, but it's going to be a very tight ball game here. I'm picking the Lions over the Seahawks. And finally, key game number 4. It is the Buffalo Bills versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are a slight 2.5-point favorite and expect that number to go even lower, maybe to probably 1.5, maybe 1. Josh Allen in a destruction over he made big time, basically destroy the Jaguars last week. 23 of 30, 263 yards, 4 touchdowns. Basically torched that terrible Jacksonville defense they had. Baltimore's Lamar Jackson was 12 of 15, 182 yards, 1 touchdown. He really didn't win the game all by himself because Derrick Henry really was more the key in that football game here. It boils down to, can the Ravens get that running game going again? Derrick Henry torched that Cowboy defense when it was supposed to be good, but obviously the running game, the Cowboys can't stop the run. And the Bills kind of have that same problem too. They're having trouble stopping the run themselves, but obviously Jacksonville was bad last week. They were able to stop them on both sides of the balls. I think it boils down to, boy, this is going to be a very tight ball game, and I think this is going to be a little bit more low-scoring game than you think, because I think it boils down to the point that which team makes plays more in this one here. I think, to me, both defenses are going to struggle in this game. It's going to be offense all the way in this football game, but it wouldn't surprise me if this ends up being a low-scoring game if both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson make mistakes. It's all going to come down to who makes the plays in this game. This is a 50-50 pick here. It's hard to say who wins this football game, but I got to make a pick here. I'm going to go with the Ravens. I think the Ravens will give the Bills their first loss of the season here. Obviously, the Bills secondary, even though they're finally getting into a groove, but their ability to stop the run now is going to be a factor in this game. And the way that the Ravens have been running the ball lately, they've been running the ball, especially against the Cowboys last week. The Bills could be in for a long game here, but it boils down to who will make the big plays. I think Lamar Jackson and the Ravens get back on track here and get back to 500 here to get their record at 2-2. I think the Ravens will edge out a victory against the Bills in this one here. I like the Ravens over the Bills. The Ravens at -2.5. All right, everybody, that wraps up my 4 key game picks for week number 4. Please check the description below for all of my week 4 picks, and I'll talk to you all next week when I make my picks for week number 5. So take care and enjoy your football weekend.